Good evening and welcome to the Bronze Lens Talkback, Ailey, an exploration of the power of dance. My name is Ray Cornelius and I am the host of Upfront inside the entertainment industry. And I have the pleasure of talking to an amazing panel this evening about this wonderful film. I have been a follower and fan of Alvin Ailey for well over 27 years and was ecstatic when Bronze Lens Film Festival asked me to moderate tonight's panel discussion. We're going to be talking to, like I said, a number of amazing people, including the film's director, Jamila Wignot. She is a Peabody Emmy Award-winning NAACP Image Award-winning documentarian and the director of Ailey. We're also going to be talking to Omelika Kuumba, Artistic Director Emerita of Giwayenmata and the instructor of Spelman College's African Dance Forms in the Department of Dance Performance and Choreography, as well as my good friend and award-winning filmmaker, dancer, and choreographer, Jewel D. Lane. You know, Jewel has had an opportunity to work with Ailey's sister company, Ailey 2, for a performance a couple of years ago called Touch Degree. So we're going to be talking to him about that as well. But I want to jump right into this, Jamila. First of all, congratulations on this amazing film. I had an opportunity to check it out the other night. And like I said, I've been following Ailey for 27 years, and there was so much information in this movie that I had never seen before, I had never experienced before. I finally got to hear what Mr. Ailey sounds like through some of the interviews that are featured. But how did you become attached to this project, and were you a fan of Mr. Ailey's work before becoming the director of the film?
Well, thank you all so much for having me here. This is so exciting, and I'm really happy to be on this panel with Jewel and Sister Omaleka. Yes, so this project actually is sort of a serendipitous one for me. I was approached by the executive producers at Insignia Productions who had been doing some research and noticed that there hadn't been a kind of full biographical portrait of Mr. Ailey. And we know each other from the public media PBS circles. So they approached me in 2017 and said, hey, do you want to make a film? Would you be interested in directing a film about Alvin Ailey? And I couldn't believe, A, that one hadn't been done, and B, that the project had come my way, because I am a huge fan of Ailey, though I came to them, I think, pretty late. I was in college, and the Black student group on campus had tickets to a performance. And so it was actually the first introduction I ever had. And it just was this incredibly powerful experience of feeling this kind of raw truth and power. It's just very visceral, these bodies on stage, this incredible sense of storytelling, and really, for me, a sense of freedom. I just remember feeling like I was leaning in, seeing something I had never seen or experienced before, and in that kind of process of seeing, feeling seen. And so that evening really stayed with me, you know, just as a kind of super fan. And so it was just like extraordinary to be offered the opportunity. I actually didn't know much about Mr. Ailey's personal biography either. So that was the other really exceptional thing, to sort of know something of the company from the standpoint of just being an appreciative spectator, and then getting to spend time immersing myself in his life and his story, his point of view. I'm really interested as a filmmaker in point of view and creating films that are immersive and sort of stay within the perspective and experience of the subject of the biography. And it felt with this film, you know, once we discovered these audio recordings that hadn't been made public before, that we really had an opportunity to kind of dive into the life experiences that informed the work of this artist. So, I mean, just really amazing and grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I want to talk about how at the same time that you're talking about Mr. Ailey's life, there's also a focus on this work that's actually being produced by the company, the present company, Exodus, which was choreographed by Rennie Harris. And he really also kind of serves as a narrator for the project as well. So can we talk about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. This new work actually is called Lazarus. Rennie Harris's last work was Exodus. So Lazarus, yeah, I mean, basically when we started thinking about, well, how would we tell this story? I felt like we could not do justice to Mr. Ailey's vision or to kind of what he dedicated his life to if we just chose to create a biography that was only about his life, you know, the beginning to his death, that his legacy lives on as powerfully as ever, and seeing the kind of vibrancy of the company today was essential. So we came to the company and pitched them on doing a biography and said, you know, in addition, we'd love to have some access to what's happening at the company today. Is there anyone we could follow, anything we could, you know, document? And Robert Battle, the artistic director, said, oh, it's pretty amazing that you approach us right now because we're about to embark on our 60th anniversary, and we've commissioned Rennie Harris to make this hour-long evening dance inspired by Mr. Ailey's life. So it was wonderful and also completely daunting, because now I had essentially two extraordinary choreographers whose work I had to figure out, you know, how to showcase and grapple with kind of what the balance would be between the two. And, you know, funnily enough, it really, both Rennie and Mr. Ailey are incredibly charismatic figures. And in the beginning of the project, it's like, I'm falling in love with Mr. Ailey, I'm falling in love with Rennie, I'm falling in love with Mr. Ailey. And there was this kind of, the early edits, it felt like this dual biography, which was never the intention. So really with his dance and Lazarus, it was trying to figure out a way to find the movement vocabulary that we captured in the rehearsal process that demonstrated some of the themes that were, you know, that sort of were consistent in Mr. Ailey's life. But I mean, it was, you know, I don't have a dance background and it was a real steep learning curve. But again, just incredible to be in that rehearsal space, because it is really a sacred space. I think it was the space that Mr. Ailey was most like comfortable in. And that's really, you know, when you're making the work, that's the really exciting part. And of course you want to perform it, but the process of making things, of working with collaborators, is just really, you know, as I said, it's very sacred. And to be able to witness that in this new generation of dancers was wonderful.
Yeah. So my next question is for Omaleka. Congratulations on serving as the artistic director for Giwayenmata dance company here, drum and dance company here in Atlanta. And I wanted to know, because you're a New York City girl and you were a youth during the time that Mr. Ailey's company was really, you know, gaining momentum and gaining ground. So how did that inspire you as an up and coming dancer, as well as a drummer, who, you know, you basically had this love for movement? So how did he inspire you?
Wow. Whew. I'm getting chills just thinking about his journey and the inspiration that I felt the first time I saw him perform. As a child, I got a chance to see Ailey, and I was just amazed. As I recall, of course, it was Revelation that caught me first. And we see that is a staple that continues. Just to feel movement and to see what it looks like when you're feeling it, if that makes any sense, is one of the reasons that I love dance so much, to be able to feel it, to be able to look at it. And as a child, I started choreographing. I used to dance with my friends on the block. And we would make up dances together and show it to our parents. And then my cousins and I had a group, and we danced together and showed it to the rest of the family. So knowing that what I did as a child could translate to a big stage was very, very exciting and very just chilling. Because when it's something that knowing that it's something that I loved, and knowing that it's something that other people loved and other people could really appreciate is mind-boggling. Dancing is a mind-boggling experience because it touches so many areas of our lives. It tells so many different kinds of stories for us. Regarding the company, you did ask me about Giwayenmata and how that influenced me. I think just as a director and knowing the importance of connecting with a number of souls, a number of spirits, and finding ways to connect those beings and connect those bodies in ways that are empowering, and in ways that are encouraging, and in ways that are motivating, just charges the process. It charges the process, knowing that These are other living entities that can do what I want them to do, that can do what they want to do, and take what I want them to do and make it their own. And I think that's likely what Mr. Ailey did in so much of his work, because you can see there's a consistency that happens from generation to generation with each of his pieces. But then you also see that element of the individual artist's personality just blink through every now and then. Doesn't change the context, but you get a chance to see how it's still living and breathing, even though some of the pieces are decades old.
Yeah. So Jewel, I have to ask you, when did you first discover the brilliance of Mr. Ailey?
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on the show, Ray, and congratulations to Jamila for a brilliant film. And it's always good to be in frequency with Mama Omelika. There was something really beautiful that Bill T. Jones said about this idea of looking for form. And that stuck with me because as a child, the only representation of form that I had was fame. And so seeing Gene Anthony Ray across my screen every day was like, I want to do that. And so, but there was a part of me that said, oh, you don't have permission to do that. You're not supposed to do that. So it wasn't until I got into high school and I started working with the Freddie Hendricks Youth Ensemble of Atlanta, now the Youth Ensemble of Atlanta. And we were on a bus traveling, I think, to Tennessee, and they put the tape on of Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. So I was like, okay, what is this? And all of a sudden, everything that I thought I knew about the trajectory of dance just exploded. And like seeing people like Dudley Williams, like just across the screen, I was like, I want to do that because my body looked just like his. I can do that. And so I would emulate that. And so I didn't know anything about choreography, how to put things together. All I knew is I was like, well, there's a black man that I saw on the bus. He had his shirt off, and that's what I want to do. And so for me, seeing this documentary just hit home on so many forms. So going back to the idea of looking for form, and I think within this form, this is the kind of history that we have to keep repeating and permeating and letting like people know like this is our history. And going to a PWI, the things that we're taught, we're taught about like, the Martha Grahams and like, the Paul Taylors, but there's always a little bit of Alvin Ailey. And it's like, okay, this was Alvin Ailey, but to see these images, like to see like this archival footage, like repeatedly, like permeate my eyes, I think that's super important. So for me, it's important because that's what I saw as a child. So.
Yeah. And I want to remind our listeners and viewers that today's conversation is brought to you by the Sundance 2021, as well as the Atlanta Film Society, the Bronze Lens Film Festival, and the historic Plaza Theater. I want to go back to something that you all have mentioned, and that was the archival footage. And in particular, Jewel, you mentioned Dudley Williams. He is featured in this film along with archival footage of John Parks and, of course, Miss Judith Jamison. I want to go back to you, Jamila. All of this footage, the audio, the pictures, even what I felt like were private conversations that Mr. Ailey was having about his young life as a boy growing up in Texas and venturing off to California, and even his first time going to New York City. How did you know what to use and what not to use?
Oh, man. Time. It took time. That's the thing. There is an overwhelming amount of material for this film, as you just mentioned, all those layers. And I think where we started was really with the audio interviews. So those are the interviews that you're talking about where you hear him sort of talking about his early years in Texas, being lashed to his mother's hip, looking for a place to be, going to California, discovering Katherine Dunham, which kind of unlocks all this possibility for him, and so on. So those audio recordings are actually interviews he conducted with A. Peter Bailey in the last year of his life. And so there is, I think, Mr. Ailey is trying to set up the foundation for a biography, and there's a quality to the way he talked in those interviews that was different from the way that he conducted himself in the on-camera public interviews, the numerous ones he gave through his lifetime. So we started really listening to those, and there was a kind of poetry and like invocation and just real lyricism to those. And that really set the foundation for us. And we just sort of started to come up with some rules for ourselves. Like we wouldn't introduce any of the on-camera interviews until it made sense for them to join Mr. Ailey on his journey. So you don't meet anybody until high school, where he encounters Carmen de Lavalade and Don Martin, both of whom were part of the company in its earliest days. And that, and likewise, everybody sort of builds out from there. I think the biggest leap we made, and which was, growth for me as an artist, was really leaning into Mr. Ailey's idea of blood memories. It was an aha moment for Rennie Harris, as he talks about in the film. And it was an aha moment for me because it meant that, he really saw himself as a conduit for something much larger than himself. And he really was interested in thinking, I think, about legacy and rootedness and history. And so that meant that when we're talking about Texas, we don't have to just limit it to the actual either footage that's literally from the specific time period of his life, or a still photograph of him, that we could open it up to look at the experience. And we really, again, worked to put ourselves inside of his body as he moved through this world, because that's what those audio recordings felt like, that he wasn't just telling the facts of his life. He was in this process that was sort of transporting him back to those very days. And so he was back in Texas, with his mother. He was back in LA, discovering the world of dance. And that really opened up possibilities for us to be a little, I think, more experimental in our use of a kind of very expansive archival.
And I can say, as a viewer, especially seeing those images and then hearing his voice on the big screen, you did feel as if you were on this journey with him and kind of going back. And, as a family member, as he was introducing his earlier life and then some of the experiences, his good friend that saved him from drowning. I mean, all of those experiences, I think, just really added a richness to the film. Speaking of archival footage, we have a special presentation that we want to share. This is a performance titled Cry, that features the one and only Miss Judith Jamison.
Been on a train. The Black women who would encourage you, who would be there always, who were so supportive, that you could not fail. I saw a man.
I get these images.
Die slow.
He would say things like, "You're scrubbing floors. You're tending a baby. You're a queen."
And I'm never gonna be the same.
I had no inclination that this was dedicated to all Black women, especially our mothers, and that this was a birthday gift to his mom. But you could hear the importance in the music.
Gonna soothe my pain.
The angst in her voice.
Damn you, mister, and I dragged him out the door. Damn you, mister, and I dragged him out the door.
And you just survive inside of what he's giving you and what the music is telling you, You live in those moments.
I suspect there's a train going north in a month or two. I still hear his words, he said.
Identity was a strong message. Being able to say through the choreography, I am, was a very, very important theme that ran through the dances. I am. Stand in your own being, no matter what. It's very important to have that because it transcends dance and it opens the person to a new realization or consciousness of who they are and how to be who they are.
That whole last section, I didn't know how I did it. So I couldn't feel anything from here down. I mean, it was like, okay, I know there's something there holding me up, and just plow on through. And when it comes to that last step, you dig down in there like you have never dug before.
Lord, Lord, where will I be tomorrow night? Yeah.
No matter what others may think of you, this is who you are. How important is that to you to be able to say, through your movement, through your being, I am.
Thunderous applause. Alvin stood right next to me. The curtain had been down for a little bit and people were still applauding. I'm like dripping in sweat. I'm going like, oh, wow, whew, got to do that one. And he says to me, now what? Like, what is he going to do next? What next?
Wow. Amazing, amazing, amazing. You know, so back in 2019, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Ms. Judith Jamison, and she talked specifically about that performance. I remember her telling me that they really, you know, he came to her with this idea. He did not explain to her that this was a gift for his mother and for Black women. Even the costume, they just kind of had her stand there, and they just started sewing fabric on her and really sewed her into that dress. And that by the time she got to the part of Ride On, Be Free, she could not feel her legs. And she, I knew there was a God because I knew I had to continue, but I didn't know where it was going to come from. So when I saw this part in the film, I was like, oh yeah, like this is, I mean, definitive Ailey. What made you put this piece in there? Because I think when for those of us that follow Ailey and we think of Ailey, that is the one performance that always resonates with the company's brand.
Absolutely. I think so interesting. I think most of us come into Ailey through Revelations and then have this discovery of all these other works. I should say at the top, he made over 70 dance works. So I really could not possibly do justice to all of them. And in the end, there were dance works that I knew, you know, I had to treat in the film, but Cry is one that I had to do for its importance to the company, but for its importance to me. I mean, this is a work that I watch over and over and over again. And I think it speaks to what you were speaking to, Sister Omelika, that like every generation, it's a dance that's handed down first from Miss Jamison, then to Donna Woods for a very long time. It didn't go to anybody else, then to, you know, the next dancer in the row. It's a dance that requires a kind of maturity and understanding of life. People, you know, who dance it say to be able to bring all the emotion and experience to it and to endure what the dance requires. It is really a dance of endurance. And, you know, I wanted to include it to honor my own mother, who, you know, feels very much a part of this kind of description of Black womanhood. You know, I mean, she's exactly that kind of, you know, loving, demanding, you know, encouraging mother. But I also think, you know, there's a message in this dance about, you know, when Miss Jamison says, you just have to plow on through. I mean, that is life. There is a message in this dance about, you know, finding the strength somehow within yourself to keep on going when so many things are stacked against you. And most significantly, I think there's a kind of, it's not transcendence in the sense of escaping the conditions in which you are in. It is a kind of understanding that there is a piece of you inside of you that no one can ever own. And I think this is what the kind of dance shows you at the end, that this is a woman who has probably not escaped the conditions that she's in. But she knows something about a part of herself that is always free. And I think it's very powerful that so many of Mr. Ailey's dances include that message, even though, and I know we're going to get to this later in the conversation, I don't know that he was able to live out that message to the fullest in his own life, that he is putting messages into his work that are available to all of us. And yet, as a private individual, wasn't himself maybe able to attain that same goal.
And I want to put a pin there because I do want to come back to that. But there was something that I thought was very, it jumped at me at the end of the Cry performance where Mr. Ailey explains or expresses to Judith Jamison what next, you know, from the standpoint of what do I do next to top this? And, you know, we see throughout the film this pressure to have to do the next big thing. So I want to pivot to Sister Omalika from the standpoint of, you know, running a dance company, having to be in vogue, having to speak to people at that time with the social issues that are going on, with issues that are happening amongst women. How are you able to kind of find that next big thing after doing an amazing work?
Well, one of the things that blesses me about having been the artistic director for 25 years is I've had the opportunity to work with a number of other outstanding and phenomenal dancers and choreographers. And one of the things that has kept it fresh, or that kept it fresh for me, was not just my being the choreographer for pieces, but other members of the company being choreographers as well. And sometimes we would bring in other guest artists to put pieces on us. When you mentioned the times, I remember we had a show that we dedicated to men. And it was right at the time, one of the times, when our brothers were being shot down left and right. And one of our choreographers and phenomenal dancers by the name of Zakia Sabri did this awesome piece. And it left, we were in tears by the time we finished because I'm choked up thinking about it now. But it just showed how our men have to be warriors and how we have to continue to persevere and we have to continue to push through no matter what. Like Sister Jamila said, you know, the women may not get through, but there's still a part of us, there's still a piece of us that we still have to carry on so that we can continue to do what we need to do. So working with African dance, I find that it's important to be able to tell our stories as Africans in America through those same movements. So I look at the history, I look at the context of upon which the dance was created, and then I say, okay, I want you to use this dance. If they don't bring it to me, if they didn't bring it to me, I would tell them, I want you to use this dance and tell this story based on what the dances was originally created to tell. And so that's what helped it for me to stay fresh, constantly seeing the talent that was in the women with whom I worked, and just pushing and nudging and encouraging them to do what they do, using the bodies and the minds and the spirits that we had to make it happen.
Wow, absolutely. Jamila, I want to come back to you, to the point that I believe that you were about to make before that. And that's this idea of identity and Black success and am I good enough? You know, it was often said throughout the film that Mr. Ailey, never felt that he was good enough. I mean, his name had become synonymous with brilliance and opulence and just amazing, craftsmanship as a director of this American dance company. And even at one point he said, well, what if I took my name away and just called it the American Dance Company? Can we talk about that? Because there just seemed to be so much pressure that, from a fan perspective, and I think for many people that have watched Ailey performances, we're like, oh my gosh, how does he do it? But then also seeing that, oh wow, he was really dealing with a lot of pressure to be Alvin Ailey.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very complicated part of his story, but also I think incredibly relatable. And I think today about, just even on social media, hashtag Black excellence, hashtag Black girl magic, and these things that we say to celebrate each other and kind of hold each other up, but in a way that those kinds of, it takes a lot of work to be excellent. It takes a lot of work to create this kind of effortless image that's out there. It is a persona that one develops. And then what happens when that persona becomes what people think is real, and the kind of, confusion, I think, that's inevitable when, in Mr. Ailey's case, he gave everything to, I think, his work. He was consumed by his work. And as, people testified to in the film, he did not create very many intimate friendships, much less intimate partnership, and so it's interesting to hear somebody like a George Faison, who had a 50-year life partner who just recently passed away, speak to the fact that if you don't have that person, what happens when the curtains close and you go home? Where do you go home to? So I think that moment of him saying, we can just take my name off of it. We don't know what he would have done, but it raises, I think, a lot of questions about what was he in search for in that moment? What would that break have provided him? And he ultimately chose he chose to come back. And there was a reason for that. And I think it's the challenge of also, a time in which there was the one and only. I mean, there were other people working at the time, to be clear, but he was sort of on the highest of the pedestals. And when you're, I think when you're at that point in your career, and when what you've created is a platform for so many people behind you, do you just walk away knowing what it will mean? I mean, when you become a groundbreaker who is paving a path, how do you just step away and then hope that there will still be a space for all these, younger people who he was, I think, dedicated to? So, I mean, I don't actually think that we've figured out a way to reconcile that for ourselves today. I think this idea of the sort of, you have to be twice as good and work twice as hard. Okay. To make it half as far, right? That's something that we commonly talk about, but there is a real pain in that. And we shouldn't have to be twice as good or twice as, this kind of notion of perfection that I think becomes a requirement for acceptance into the mainstream it's an impossible thing to achieve. I mean, I just always think too, like, remember when Obama wore a tan suit on Easter and the world lost its mind? I mean, that was his flaw. That's his fatal flaw. It's just like, there is nothing at some point. I think it's incumbent on all of us to find ways to think about how we can just be. And that's what I think is so interesting, is that I think there is a message of be who you are in Mr. Ailey's work. And I think he could channel that and find a sense of himself on the stage that he just simply couldn't figure out a way to construct outside of it.
Wow. And you mentioned that he was able to present this image of empowerment and identity, yet even in his personal life, we see throughout the film that he really struggled with that. And particularly his the fact that he's a Black gay man living in America at that time, where it was just very taboo. It was very frowned upon. And so I want to, pivot over to you, Jewel, because your work that you did with Ailey 2, Touch and Agree, is about same-sex love, Black gay love. And the fact that Mr. Ailey was not really able to express that part of himself. And I really honestly believe that was the frustration, that was the loneliness that he was experiencing, is that he never really got to express that part of himself. So Jewel, when you brought Touch and Agree to Ailey 2, what was the response to that? Because again, this was a work that I felt that Mr. Ailey himself would have loved had he seen it.
Wow. The response that I got was really good feedback. And it's so crazy because when I actually got the opportunity to come into create on them, that was the first piece that came to mind. And I didn't even think about all the extra stuff. I was like, this is the piece I think is really polished. Let me get it together. And so it wasn't until I had a friend that said, your piece is real gay. And we've never really seen that, on the Ailey Company. And I was like, you know what? I'm cool with that. And I think for Mr. Ailey, the courage that he had, I had to figure out a way to really breathe that life into myself and say, okay, well, how do you tell your personal stories and you make yourself honest as a choreographer? And so for me, when I created the piece, it was pretty much like my coming out piece. I had already came out, but I was like, I've never really choreographed on two men. I don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe they should take off their shirts and just hug. I don't know. And it was a pivotal moment for me to be expressive, because it was a way for me to educate too, because the piece came out of this idea of not knowing how to navigate a relationship. And so I was in a relationship and it ended, and I said, how cool would it be to actually create a piece to say a relationship can work with two Black gay men? So the response has been really good. It's actually a piece that I've been working on for a very, very, very long time, and it just would not leave my sight, and I'm okay with that. And it kind of has different legs now. So,
there was a line that that was said, I believe it was by Bill T. Jones, where he was talking about Mr. Ailey and the fact that at the latter part of his life, when he contracted HIV, the stigma that was attached to that, the shame. And he talked about, you've got these brilliant, beautiful dancers on stage where the men are men and the women are women. And we would never think of these men or women having sex. And at that time, a lot of the dancers were dying. They were contracting, HIV. Can we talk about that part and how you were able to, because I think you did a very good job of telling that part of his story, because that's always sort of been a mystery in terms of how he was really able to deal with that at that point in his life.
Yeah, when Bill T. Jones said that in the interview, we just were like, it's one of those moments in a sit-down interview where you just know, okay, well, I don't know everything that's going to go into this film, but absolutely this point has to be made clear. And I think, Bill T. Jones has the ability to speak to that, because in a way he is, he can stand in a bit for Mr. Ailey. Mr. Ailey was born in 1931. he would have been coming into, a full sense of his ideas in the 40s and 50s. And I think it's really important to think about his sense of himself within the context of his time. Meanwhile, Bill T. Jones can kind of have a critique of that, which I think is an important critique. And we just felt like the film had to address that straight on. I think it's just, I think the thing that's interesting to me, and the film, we worked to address this issue in the film, but I think, as I said, Mr. Ailey is kind of a figure of his time, like his other contemporaries. Merce Cunningham was in a very long-term and committed relationship, was not ever sort of using his sexuality as an identifier for himself as a choreographer. Paul Taylor, similarly, they're just part of this generation that came up at a time where you couldn't really speak to that. And so it's tragic. I think part of what this film exposes, and again, we wanted to sort of be in a point of view, and we didn't want to sort of stop down the film to kind of speak to things that I think the film speaks for in its own telling, which is obviously there is a respectability politics that Mr. Ailey felt he had to abide by to attain the success that he was able to attain, and then to keep the company going. And not just him. I mean, his board, various people who were invested in the company's success. And you just wonder if he had survived. That's, I think, always my question is like, if he had survived, sort of where would he be today? What kind of ways would he be aligning himself with communities today? Would he continue to be, invested in a very kind of heteronormative portrait of, Black intimacy or intimacy in general? We can't say, but I just appreciate Bill T. Jones' candor in that moment and kind of laying bare the whole apparatus.
Absolutely. Omaleka, I want to talk to you about working with Ailey Camp, which is just, when you think of Alvin Ailey, we often think of the performances, but Ailey also consists of this school that really works within the New York City community, and they've also done work here in the Atlanta community for a number of years, where a lot of young aspiring dancers and performers can kind of get that Ailey experience of being able to work with the dancers and the instructors, and you were able to do that for a number of years. So let's talk about that experience if we can.
Oh my goodness, Ailey Camp is a phenomenal baby of Mr. Ailey. I believe it was his last baby, and the work that we get a chance to do with these young people based on his standards of empowerment and self-discovery, the work is just awesome. I mean, it's one of the most outstanding experiences that I have had as a teacher, because the space allows the instructors to teach. Every component that you can imagine being necessary for a quality learning experience is available. Every component that you can imagine for a quality teaching experience is available. We have counselors for the students. We have group leaders, CAMP, those are the names of the groups. We deal with middle school age children who are just at that very, very tender point in their lives of self-discovery, of just trying to figure out how to be within themselves, their own bodies, and then, of course, communicating with other people. Learning African dance, learning percussion in some places, learning tap, learning ballet, learning Horton. I mean, and all of this is based around self-esteem and self-discovery. Dance is a vehicle through which the young people learn about themselves and learn about the world. And so for me, having been immersed in that environment for so many years, where all I had to do was teach. I didn't have to deal with discipline. I didn't have to deal with anything but teaching. So as a teacher, I feel as a choreographer, as a teacher, that this is my joy and this is my passion. And I feel like it's a gift. So if I can give that gift freely, it just makes all the difference in the world. And seeing the young people grab the tools, grab the knowledge, grab the wisdom, and get that self-respect, that self-awareness through movement and self-esteem, it's a wonderful place to be. If my grandchildren were old enough, I'd be nudging my children. Come on, we gotta get them in the camp. We gotta get them in Ailey Camp, because it's a beautiful place, and we have a phenomenal director, Miss Nasha Thomas, who comes and puts just gets us all in order, making sure that we're on that path. Our director at the time, Miss Diane Sales, had us moving as a wonderful machine, a team. And our goal was to make sure that those young people felt validated, that they felt special, and that they had the vehicles to express themselves through the art. So I love Ailey Camp. Ailey Camp is the bomb diggity, and I'm so honored to have been a part of that process here in Atlanta.
Yeah. Jamila, I want to ask you, as a filmmaker, I mean, I mentioned at the top of this conversation, you're a Peabody, Emmy, and NAACP Image Award winning documentarian, but what did you professionally or personally learn throughout this journey creating this film that maybe you had not learned? And whatever that lesson is, how will you use it moving forward as a content creator?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, truly, this is the second film of mine that was sort of independent and could be led entirely by my own voice. I love all the films that I've been able to work on, but a lot of them are commissioned pieces, which means they're commissioned for a particular strand. The American Experience, for example, on PBS, which has a kind of way in which it tells stories, or in the case of Many Rivers, African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, I was one of four other directors sort of tackling that series. So we had to kind of come up and have a kind of cohesive voice. And with this film, I feel like I really pushed myself artistically to think about how I wanted to tell the story, how I wanted to make use of all of these elements, and working with my incredible collaborators. So there's a kind of leadership quality that I think I've had kind of growth in terms of working with a team. And, most significantly, I mean, it really is that moment that Miss Mary Barnett talks about of, standing in your own being. And I think whenever you make work, that's what you're confronted with, is like, you have to really look at yourself and look at your voice and contend with, great insecurity about whether it's good enough and who gets to be the judge of whether it's good enough. And when is it that it's right? Is it somebody else, tells you it's right? And I think that tension of kind of discovery and self-acceptance and feeling worthy was certainly something that I think that part of Mr. Ailey's story felt relevant to me, as I'm sure it does to all artists and people who make things, or just humans. It's a kind of a human quality that we all have to wrestle with. So for me, it was really just trusting myself and kind of having faith. So, carrying that on to the next piece is going to be the thing. And how can I, each work is, as you're saying, Jewel, you're not done with even this piece that you said. It's something that you're working on. And I feel like that's the thing is, we make work and that's not the end of it. We're not like slam dunk, it's over. We have to go on and we have to make the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so understanding that there's a process of improvement and self-discovery is really something that I feel like I've learned from working on this.
Yeah. And it's good to say, I should say, we're happy to say that the next step is the distribution. And you received that news about a couple of days ago that Neon is going to distribute this film. So how does that, for those that don't know that process, what are the steps for that, and where does it go from here?
Yeah, so Neon is a phenomenal distributor. They are responsible for having distributed Parasite in U.S. theaters. And what it means for us is we have this incredibly, reputable but artist-minded distributor who is interested in helping us get the film into theaters nationwide, and hopefully eventually onto streaming platforms. And that means that we will have a theatrical release, streaming platform, and also the PBS broadcast. So it really means there are just many, many ways that the film can now make it into the hands of the audiences across the country. And that is absolutely something that was always a goal for us. And we're just one step closer to that. And I feel, for me, it was a film we always made with the intention of experiencing it on a big screen in a room full of people. Like, I really miss, these spaces that existed pre-pandemic, whether it's a live dance performance, music, movies, that you choose to enter into a room full of strangers and watch something and hopefully have a kind of experience of community and collectivity, through experiencing the arts. And that was something we always hoped for this film. So now it seems like that's going to be possible. And I just can't wait. I really just can't wait.
Absolutely. I want you to talk about the takeaway message. What do you want audiences to take away from Ailey?
I think I want them to think about the kind of sort of universal messages of his work, as we've been talking about, this idea of finding yourself, self-acceptance, self-love. I want people to think about the importance of community, collectivity, which I think is a part of a dance company, right? It's a kind of chosen family who goes on the road to stage these works and why they do that. Importantly, I really want people to think about what gave Mr. Ailey's work so much power, and the ways in which, if you just did a laundry list of his biography, I think you're like, oh, well, he's born poor, born in, segregated Jim Crow Texas, born to a single mother, like the idea that the odds are stacked against him. And yet he knew the wealth and resources that he had in the community all around him. If you think about his first work, he sets it in a juke joint, which is a place where at the end of the work week, Black people could go, be free, have fun, laugh, drink, talk too loud, wear crazy clothes, whatever you wanted to do. You were outside of a gaze. And to know, that those spaces existed and fed him. And then he chose to say, this is ordinary people and they are deserving of being the center of the stages, not just of the United States, but of the world, is incredible. And lastly, I think to think about the sacrifice that cost him, and to move forward to a place where we don't ask people, we don't make that a requirement of success for any of us. Don't make it a requirement for your success personally, and let's not make that a requirement of the success of these icons that we adore. They are human beings, they are flawed, and we should embrace them, in their totality.
Jamila Wignot, Omelika Kuumba, and Jewel D. Lane, thank you so much for being part of today's Talkback conversation about Ailey film. Again, we'd like to thank Bronze Lens Film Festival, the Sundance 2021 Atlanta Film Society, and the historic Plaza Theater for this special presentation. And we cannot wait for audiences to see this amazing film. Thank you again for your time, and we look so forward to seeing Ailey everywhere all throughout 2021.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.